All right, let's get straight to it. So this is gonna be called a trick series. I don't know how often I'm gonna do this. I'm not real big on standing in parks talking to myself when there's a bunch of people around, but we're gonna do this anyway. My favorite thing is to come out and just burn it down, go through all the packs and go through all the props. But I think it'd be pretty cool just to talk through, just to learn how to do this, to talk through kind of a trick series and some of the keys to success that I've experienced in my short time flying quadcopters. The title of this one is Tiny Gaps. So I'm going to discuss kind of my keys to success of getting through gaps. I'm not really going to discuss doing tricks through gaps. Nah, screw it. I might just get into it, whatever. But the overall topic is gaps, right? So a couple of keys that are required to be successful when negotiating or flying in, through, and around tight gaps. One is confidence, right? You have to have confidence in your abilities. So you have to have ability, but you also have to have confidence in your abilities. That one's pretty key. The other one is vision. You tend to go where your eyes look, right? So if you're looking at a tree, you're probably gonna hit that tree, right? So if you're flying a gap, don't look at the tree, look through the tree. So I see my gap, I'm looking beyond the gap, I wanna fly through the gap. So we have confidence, we have vision, and we have get your mind right. All the things are gonna happen. You're gonna crash, you're gonna wreck, you're gonna tear props up, you're gonna get scared, you're gonna get nervous, it's just gonna happen. The key is just committing, right? So confidence, vision, committal, and the next is follow through, right? And then progression. Progress through the gaps. So this one's about tiny gaps, but start out big, right? This gap here, this may be a tiny gap for some folks. Run through that gap. Run through it 100 times, right? As you start to progress and run through that gap 100 times, guess what's gonna happen? You're gonna be like, man, this tiny gap ain't so tiny anymore. It's the size of a truck, a train, whatever, all right? So once you're confident, move to the next smaller gap. Okay. I'm gonna shoot this gap. So that was a tiny gap, now it's no longer a tiny gap, I'm confident. Once you're done with that, you're gonna move on, you're just gonna keep progressing, right? Take your confidence, come out here in the field and say, oh, what's the next smallest gap? This tree, all right, I'll shoot that gap. A little bit on gaps, in my mind, there's two types of gaps, right? There's horizontal gaps and there's vertical gaps. So this would be considered a vertical gap. This would be considered a horizontal gap. Both are very different. Obviously, one is horizontal, the other is vertical. So they each require their own amount of throttle modulation or throttle manipulation, right? So the horizontal is typically easier to me. I can flow horizontally a lot better than I can flow vertically on a gap. And the reason being is because gravity, right? Vertical gap, you're gonna dive, you're headed towards the ground, you wanna recover from that. So back to the gaps, tiny gaps. You go where your eyes go, right? Through the gap, I'm looking beyond the gap into the next tree or field or whatever it is. So as I progress to a smaller and smaller gap, I'm looking through the gap, into the tree, and then I hit the tree. That's exactly what I didn't want to do. So let's put this baby over. Big GoPro. All right, let's try that again. So, like I said, you go where your eyes go or where your hands lead you, right? Small gap, I want to go through that gap to the other side. And it's a progression, right? You also need to know the size of your gap relative to the size of your quad. If your quad is too small or too big and the gap is too small, guess what's gonna happen, right? Obvious, Captain Obvious. So for instance, this gap, probably won't be able to fly straight through there, but what you can do is knife edge the gap, right? So there are ways to get through gaps that are tighter than what your quad is able to fly through and negotiate. Next on a horizontal gap is flow, right? Depending on what you want to do through the gap, if you're just flying through it, just fly through the gap, right? If you want to do a trick, you're going to have to lead in, give it some throttle, and blip over the gap. And also, depending on the effect you want, maybe you don't want to start low, you want to start on edge and just fly straight through the gap. You can even dive down into the gap. This would probably be a little challenging just because of its angle, its position, but if I'm up high, I want to come down through the gap, right? Vertical gaps are much the same. There aren't a lot of vertical gaps in this park, but same deal. I want to dive through the gap and then come out with throttle. So here, throttle manipulation and modulation is very important. So as if I'm vertical, I come out of the dive, my nose is down, I bring it up slowly into the throttle slowly to prevent oscillations. So I'm bringing the throttle in early. Right here, I'm bringing throttle in and I ride out of it. And that keeps that oscillation, you know, the settling with power, I guess, is what you'd call that. So as you're coming down on a steep dive really fast, you level out, your helicopter kind of oscillates. Yeah, we want to avoid that. You can do that by keeping your dive longer and then bringing the throttle in sooner. It'll get rid of all that oscillation. It doesn't happen every time, but most of the time you can get away with it. And that's pretty much it. So confidence, vision, control, that's one I left out. And then spot your target. So that's that vision piece, look beyond the gap. So if I want to shoot this gap, I'm not looking at the tree or I'll hit it. I'm looking beyond the tree and I fly straight through. Vision is critical, right? Your quad goes where your eyes go. I wasn't looking at that tree, but I hit it. It's a tight gap, but you get the point. And then it's commitment. Commit to the gap. Most of my crashes, I won't say your crashes, most of my crashes come because of commitment. I don't commit. I get into the trick and I'm like, oh, shit, oh, crap. And now I'm down, right? I probably got some Spanish moss in my quad. But at any rate, commit to the gap. Come into it, commit to it, go through it. And that, I believe, pretty much wraps it up. Now I have a bent prop and a dead battery. So I think you guys get the gist. Hit me up if you have questions.